All right. Well, it's 7:32. So thank you everyone for joining us this evening for the Regenerative Agronomy webinar. We're focusing on the cropping system tonight. A big thank you to Tom Briggs and his dad Cole for being, I guess, the subjects of tonight's discussion. We really appreciate that you putting yourself out there and your willingness to be involved. We also need to thank Carbon Link for because they've done the soil and carbon tests that will be used and referenced this evening. Vic No-Till and Hybrid Ag have also made contributions of using some of their information tonight. And Michael Ayres and Ed Scott, a couple of sorry, who are they're agronomists, aren't they, Tom? Sorry, I got lost there.
Yeah.
That have also been involved. So we would ask everyone if they could keep themselves on mute for the duration of the webinar. And a big thanks also to Luke and David for being here tonight as well to step through. This is tricky, this stuff, and there's no right or wrong answers. This is just an approach that we hope can help guide some of you, and every farming system is a bit different, so everyone will approach it differently. So without any further ado, I'll hand over to you, David.
Oh, thanks, Shelley. And thanks everyone for coming. And yeah, we've got a bit to cover tonight. So I guess just to give you a bit of a rundown on sort of how we'll go through tonight, we thought we'd get a bit of a introduction from Tom and about the family farm there and a bit of context around the paddocks that we're dealing with, get a feel for the enterprise, where we are, the soil types, etc., and kind of what Tom and Colin are trying to achieve with those paddocks. And then I might kind of before that just give like a 2-minute summary of regenerative ag and what it is we're all actually trying to do here. And then after that, we'll cross over to a couple of kind of people that have been looking at Tom's program and coming up with some regenerative agronomy programs. So that's including Nakala from NutriSoil, Luke from Regen Farming, who's just disappeared while he's eating his dinner probably, and Robin Tate, who's one of the Hub Care team and supports our clients with NutriSoil and is an independent agronomist in Tasmania, and she's done a pre-recorded sort of summary because she couldn't be here tonight. And my job's to kind of facilitate, get questions, give challenging questions, find out more, sort of try to find out why we're doing things rather than just we're doing this and it's a recipe, but why you're doing that. Because at the end of the day, we're trying to get profitable crops and as well as build and maintain soil health. So there is scope for questions as we're going through it, either to Tom or to Nakala or Luke or myself, or to all of us. So if you do want to type them into chat, probably that's the best way to do it. And between myself and I'm not sure if Shelley's staying around, but we'll keep an eye on the chat box and we'll come in as needed and deal with those chat questions. So I might just set the scene by saying this is part of a series of webinar slash sort of online sessions that NutriSoil initiated this year to kind of dig deeper into what is regenerative agronomy, which is sometimes called biological agronomy. And it's kind of like a new way of doing agronomy. It's not kind of throwing out some of the foundations of 20th century agronomy, the chemistry and stuff, but it's kind of adding some extra things to it. And obviously regenerative cropping, which is what we're doing tonight, there's kind of like different practices and kind of modifications of practices that croppers do, and some new types of inputs like biological inputs that kind of regenerative croppers use, and kind of they've got to mesh or integrate them into their current program without risking the financial side, Tom, and I know Tom's well aware of that side of it. But yeah, so that's the challenge. We're kind of trying to create new cropping programs, if you like, with new tools, new inputs, new tactics in the paddock operations. So that's the scene, and obviously it can get a bit nitty gritty with soil tests, where it might go tonight with Nakala and Luke looking at soil tests. but I'll try to keep it kind of relatively like not too, so we don't confuse ourselves, me included, because we've got a few soil tests. But Tom, I might bring you in just to say good day to everyone. And if you'd like to sort of maybe kick off by sort of introducing where the farm is, who the family, you guys as a family, and probably what the main enterprise mix is. If we can start with that, give us a bit of a feel for things.
Yeah, sure thing, David. And thanks, Nicola, Shelley, and NutriSoil for the opportunity to give our story again. As I was just, Shelley was running through it. I'm not sure if she said it or not, but I'll just double down. One of the other huge contributions to our journey has been Vic No Till. A huge sounding board, huge support network when some of the stuff, and I was fortunate enough to be on the board for 8 years. When stuff went a bit awry, an awesome community to be around to keep the wind in the sail when some other stuff was sort of crashing the door down a little bit. So yeah, we farm in the northeast of Victoria, just west of Rutherglen, which is nearly right on the border of Vic and New South. We are across about 650 owned hectares. So that goes out to nearly 1,000 hectares. There's a bit of share farming and some country of my own, which is currently on the market for a few factors. Our system has evolved. When I came home from Queensland, we had 100 sow piggery, which at any given time meant we had 1,000 total head on hand. Grain was grown and milled for that purpose. So a primary source of income out of the grain wasn't necessarily required as we could value add it through the pig. So as we moved out of that for various reasons, one was the pig price drop. That put pressure on getting a return out of just straight grain growing without value adding. Not to say that at certain points grain prices weren't too high on the pig side, but it's not a system you can shut down overnight like a feedlot and necessarily start up again. So we had to ride those highs and lows of grain price. We also had 100 Angus region cross cows that would go to a limo bull when I came home. We are next to laser level flat on our country and holding breeders over winter. Did some quite substantial damage with a huge amount of pugging. Maybe there could have been some improvements there with stroke like grazing management, but we're finding it hard. And in tough winters, we could lightly supplement sheep with grain and we've chuck an absolutely colossal amount of feed at cattle and not have much of a saleable commodity sometimes. So we settled on that the business was going to evolve down to a sheep and cropping enterprise, which has now stabilized out at about a 25, 30, 35% cropping land use and that balance being grazing country or dual purpose crops. I'd like to get up to 1,500 self-replacing merino ewes. Last couple of years have been tough starts. So our number isn't up there, but we are revolving around a sheep and cropping and a hay enterprise. When I came home from Queensland, when I was up there, and these guys will know the Browns, some people might know David and Laura Brown up at Capella, saw a completely different farming environment and saw a system, and I always thought, how could I bring that home? The main thing I came home hell bent on was stopping burning, which meant we're going to go to disseeding. And from there, it snowballed down a research path and was looking for some. And so that first year was 2016, a horrendously wet year for us. We had one paddock that was an old Lucan paddock that basically handled the water for the whole year. Only had 80 kilos or 40 odd units of nitrogen. Did 5 ton. One corner of the paddock was wet, but it infiltrated everything. Across the rest of our cropping enterprise, we stripped 1 ton to the hectare. We had incidents where water hadn't affected it, but it pulled our average down to 1. By my math, on our small scale, that was $150,000 that we left on the table just purely to infiltration. Potentially a little bit of ant, but purely to water management. Just snowballed. My questions were running. Started digging around poor old mum's garden. Looked like a pig had been in there rooting it up. mum's lawn, while it doesn't have the pressures of a farming system on it and an extractive process on it, it has only ever had green growing plants on it, no fertilizer, yet it's got access to moisture, and that soil in between paddocks that will waterlog in an average winter had an infiltration rate for an inch of water of 4 minutes. The loosened paddock that handled the water was 10, and an average paddock was 20 minutes for an inch. And so it just highlighted that within our boundaries, maybe our soils weren't what they are. Maybe we could change them. Which then naturally stemmed itself as I did the research, asked the question, fell down to the regenerative system, answered more questions. But there's also been a hell of a lot of pain and a hell of a lot of learning and being, I won't say necessarily an out-and-out pioneer of it, but developing the system without a huge amount of knowledge base out there and trying to find the information, find the experts, and at a certain point trying to have to be your own expert meant that we got a fair bit of stuff wrong, that learned from it. It hasn't been easy, but we've also seen at a basic level what we anticipated the system change would do as far as carbon, infiltration rate, soil health. That's all happened. The big crunch was a financial outcome, which has had some very tough seasonal growing conditions in there that happen when you need that little break, when you need that little windfall. Another door hit you in the face, another door hit you in the face. That we've seen the outcome of the system as far as what we want to see, as far as infiltration, soil improvement. But the balancing act across everything, and everyone's business is quite different, is you've got to make a buck at the end of the day, and where is the sweet spot?
Yeah, so thanks very much for that, Tom. Like, it's a really good sort of succinct summary of a lot of stuff. I guess that first lesson you observed was in that wet year, I think it was 2016, your infiltration rate was really poor. So we're on riverine soils that are fairly heavy, and once they've had a farming history on them, the drainage and the structure's kind of gone in them. So they sit wet for that winter period. But I guess you saw the yield penalty you got from having a major soil constraint, in this case, poor drainage or poor structure, which led to poor drainage. But the other side to that, which you've kind of subsequently learned, is yes, the soil constraint is a yield limiting factor, but so too is having enough nutrients in the topsoil cycling, especially nitrogen, but other obviously key limiting nutrients to drive yield potential as well, like that photosynthesis conversion. So it's kind of two things here. I've got to deal with my soil constraints and soil health because that's a yield limiting factor. I can be losing potential yield that I'm not even aware of sometimes. But I've also got to drive a certain amount of yield for cash flow and therefore profitability. And it's the two sides of the coin, because it sounds like you've addressed some of those major soil constraints, but the other challenge that you're still tackling with, or that you're coming around to dealing with at the moment, is making sure you've got enough nutrients cycling without disturbing the soil health to drive yield. Yeah.
And you're always the what you know over time. And one of the things you've seen as it came to actually a dollar crunch point, which we still haven't we've stabilized the ship, but still haven't turned the bow right around yet. That at the end of the day, I lost my train of thought on where I'm going to go with that. That we caught the message around what was going to flat out damage our soils. And when it came to a point of the dollar started talking louder than I want my soils to be perfect, and we reintroduced some practices with new techniques, we've actually gone back to some unfavorable chemistry. I would call it heavy-handed urea use, but just certain amounts that we know if we get those timings right, we can soften off in a lot of other areas, and haven't seen a decline off in our carbon rate, our building our organic matter, by using the tools cleverly. It's not, I think where it got to now is the sweet spot of being knowledgeable enough as to being aware that are we going to have potentially an impact on our ecology, on our biology, on our carbon levels, and if that is, how do we make sure that we're mitigating that as much as possible to keep it the level here of say carbon, let's not overdo the urea, but if it helps get the bank account to here, well then we can just keep moving along the needle. And that's come from a point of we had to go back to some input because we had to make it $1, which was challenging the paradigm again that I had since learnt and seen, but saying that we actually weren't being heavy-handed again and undoing the good work.
Yeah. Yeah, and I guess that's the thing about regenerative, the word itself. Some people will kind of see it as no input or no chemical inputs. Other people, they see them as part of the toolbox. And I think, as I mentioned in the beginning, like it's the challenge is about coming up with a new system, which is integrating some of the old practices with some new ones. But at the end of the day, I've got to maintain the soil asset because it underpins whether I'm growing pastures or crops. I've got to maintain it in reasonable functioning order. But I've also got to get yield for my sort of enterprise goals, whatever they are, my yield targets, which is going to be different for different people and different crops. And it's that balancing act of the two. But I think if you've had a degraded soil, the challenge you have is to build it back up while also making money, which is really what you went through is, can we build soils back up from a degraded state, but also make cash as we're going along here. Yeah.
And I was probably a young fella too idealistic in it that
You're still young. You're still young, Tom, mate. Everything's relative, my friend. Just don't beat yourself up because you've got heaps of years ahead of you, and I know you're turning around. So
I'm trying to get my boots on in the morning at the moment. I don't feel like my age. There's a bit of groaning going on, but
so you haven't got a chair at the front door that you have to sit on to put your boots on yet. So you're not too old because that's when you're old, mate.
I relate myself in front of 45 people and say I contemplated it. And some of it is, again, when you just define it, at one point, I saw the infiltration rate being the major issue. And then I saw a major issue after a few years being, holy hell, we need to make some money. Yeah. Not that it was all of a sudden, it was like bad year, bad management on a couple, and then poor outcome. Then the last couple of years, having the toolbox available, and the last 2 years have been sort of, other than wet, our worst case scenario for the start of the cropping season, late break, then frost, crops trying to emerge, red-legged earth mite coming out, and we couldn't afford to lose the crop. So for the first time in, 8 years, we went and used an insecticide in season. The bit, and this is where observation is enormous. The bit that I actually slept really well after going, even though I thought, damn, I'm going to have to go and use it, is there were patches that germinated when we planted the crop, and there was earth mite all over the ground underneath that canopy. So that crop had been up and established for long enough, had enough vigor, had enough energy, had enough sugars to fight off those earth mites, that those patches where the crop coming out of the ground went white overnight from the earth mite. And so my sleep at night factor was, this is a seasonal condition that our system can withstand potentially an earth mite pressure if we get the right break, if we get the season off, if we get the crop up and early. There are some tools you can use to offset those windows. Yeah. But when it goes wrong, when it doesn't rain, when it rains and it comes out and it's cold, having those tools, don't bash yourself up about it. I'm fully conscious of putting that insecticide out, so I put in amino acids into the tank, do as much as I can to help the plant. If you got to go and get the bug, don't bash yourself up about it, because if you go broke, then you don't have to tell you what when you go broke.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. I mean, again, there's a whole lot coming out in our discussion and your descriptions there, Tom. But I mean, the first thing, the way I kind of see it is it's like when you're trying to get fit or eat healthy, like every now and again, you go out and you eat something that's a bit tastier rather than more nutritious. But if you're doing that occasionally, that's different than doing it all the time. If 80% of the time you're looking after yourself, going to the gym, eating properly, and then every now and again you have you go off the track and enjoy yourself a bit too much. That's different than doing it all the time. And I think, your body can stay in a pretty good, healthy state with that. Whereas, it's a bit the same with what we're trying to do with these paddocks. If we're doing a lot of things right, they're going to start to build some resistance and equilibrium. So they can tolerate occasional disturbance and kind of trauma, if you like, chemical trauma, for want of a better term. And sort of power through. So, I mean, the other things that have come out there, obviously, you've talked a bit about biostimulants and using insecticides, and we touched a bit on urea, so fertilizers. So, obviously, regenerative agronomy is all of those things. It's seed, it's preparation of ground, it's planting equipment, it's starter fertilizer, but as well as insecticides and herbicides, potentially, usually in lower amounts and more strategically, but it's also things that are kind of building plant soil immunity, such as biostimulants, inoculants, biological type products, as well as sort of maybe some nutritional management like calcium and micronutrients and those kind of things, which are sometimes or often neglected in kind of what we might call conventional agronomy. So I think we've set the scene, Tom. There's a hell of a lot of parts to the puzzle, as you know, that you've got to juggle, and everyone here on the webinar knows as well. So without further ado, I might kind of get into the meat of the specific paddocks, because I think if I've got it right, and there's a few soil tests that were thrown at me, and me, I'm a scatterbrain, but in particular, we're going to have a look at a couple of paddocks where Nikala, Luke, and Robin had kind of looked at the soil test. I'm pretty sure Nikala and Luke know the paddocks, they know the landscape and the area. They might not have been there. Nikala has, but he knows the ground pretty well out in the Riverina. So we got the context. So they'll give you, I guess, a bit of a program, and maybe we can then, as that we look at their program, we can talk about what you've done and your perspective on that program. And if anyone else is out there, I'm already seeing Rob from WA. I'm sure someone will put in some comments, which is really good. So please, everyone else, feel free to make some comments as we go. So I'll start the scene. We've got two paddocks. Nikala, have you got a picture of the paddock that you can share?
But my PowerPoint just crashed for some reason.
It just crashed.
I think it's just opening. Oh, yep, it's all right. I got it now.
Cool. So, thanks, Shelley. Yeah.
So I'm about to share.
So Shelley's just going to show a picture of the paddock so we can get a bit of context. Tom's got something behind him, which I think must be Grant Sims sunflowers. So I don't know where that's from. But is that one of your? That's one of your paddocks. Yeah. So okay, so there's the paddock there with Tom and Colin. Is Colin there? And I don't know who else is in that picture there, but
that's Phil.
Phil. Yep, I'm with you. Yep, got it. So all the sun is throwing me off there. So this is the paddock. This is one of the paddocks. Everyone, there's a few sort of close by. So that gives everyone a bit of a scene. So we're in a cropping paddock in the Riverina country of northern Victoria, just out of Rutherglen. And you've heard some of the soil constraints, particularly structural issues that Tom's faced, and low organic matter in the soils from a farming history, which is pretty normal. There's another picture there. Thank you, Shelley.
So just while this picture is just to clarify for people, so the photo previous with Phil and Dad, and this one here is a paddock that we've set aside since the summer of 2016 and 17. They've been grown essentially a continuous growth or cover crop, and you can see that on the left-hand side, that white tread-in electric post. You can see that dead area. So we've had a summer fallow in that paddock. It gets all the same nutritional winter management, all that sort of stuff. But there will be at some point, there'll be some soil tests up on the screen I've spoken about, and we'll have shed the crop and woolshed fallow or straight woolshed. So the woolshed fallow is essentially, we've been treating that little section there as a fallow to see what the difference of just growing plants has been on that soil type, on that country. So as we go forward, if you see that bare patch to the right of that tread and the best, that's the area that we're talking about.
Yeah, great. So we've got a fallow crop a fallow area and a cover crop. And the cover crop wasn't high rates of seed. It was pretty low. Was it 5 kilos a hectare or something really low?
So to paint a picture, the photo behind me, either a year earlier or a year later was the same rate. 3 kilos of sunny, 3 kilos of millet and rain, as opposed to that photo, 3 kilos of millet, 3 kilos of sunnies and no rain or very little rain to germinate. So 6 kilo seed rates is we've gone as low as.
Yeah. And and we know the summers can have storm rain, but not as reliable, obviously, as the other seasons. So it's more just a low cost tactic. Get some plants growing when there's moisture over the summer. Can the roots of that multi-species cover, summer cover, do some structural improvement and start to change the chemical balance of the soil at a low cost, which is going to help us long term when we cycle back through the cropping phase. Cool. All right. So thanks for those pictures, Shelley. I might kick off by getting Nakala to sort of start the ball rolling. So Nakala, so you've had a look at these soils, Nakala, and you're going to sell Tom like heaps and heaps of products tonight. So, do you want me to get the soil tests up, Nakala, while you're talking, or have you got a presentation initially, or what?
Yeah, I think I'll get my presentation up, but let's be clear. I'm not giving Tom a recommendation. I'm actually using Tom as a case study because I think he does a really good job himself. And what I'm saying is probably not that different to what he's doing anyway. So I'm going to get my PowerPoint up. I'm hoping. Share. It's over there. Can I get that over there? Can you see that?
Yeah, we can. It hasn't come up as a full screen yet, but it might in a sec. Whack on that again, see what happens.
It's a full screen on my other computer, so I'm going to take that off.
Yeah.
All right.
Probably shared the wrong screen.
Yeah. All right.
There you go. Got it.
Do you want me to paint a quick picture here?
Yeah, go for it, Tom.
That yellow line that's intersecting that soil pit is that previous photo I was talking about. There's the fallow area. On the right-hand side of that photo where the paint marks are on the sidewall is the cover crop. And on the left-hand side of that yellow line or behind it is the fallow area. And we'll talk about it. And there is visually when that soil pit was opened up, it was to the line that the sprayer and the planter run where there were differences and only a variation of about a foot, which was pretty stark to see the differences that small amount of management had made on that soil type and see some of the carbon, calcium, phosphorus, sodium levels.
Yeah, great. Okay, Nakala, jump in.
So visually, I guess what you can see already is that where Tom has had the cover crop instead of the fallow, you've got, I guess, darker horizons. You've got more defined horizons, and you've got more moisture. So that's just easy to see straight away.
There's a kind of very pale kind of glade layer, we call it, behind Ed. It's in shadow a bit, but you can see where it's quite light coloured where the shadow finishes in the A2, so about 40 centimetres down, and you've got a lot more orangey red in that layer in the cover crop, which is usually a sign. Well, if it's iron minerals, it means the iron minerals have reacted with oxygen, so it means there's more oxygen in that horizon under the cover crop. So the ions actually reacted and changed. The colours come back in, the red colour, oxidation colour. So that's one thing that's sort of indicating things. Yeah.
Some other just dark visual things. So wish I had those videos of me in the soil pit with the penetrometer and the Kala. When the soil pit first opened up, I thought, oh bugger, nothing to see here. And you sat there for 10 minutes, and then it really started standing out. A week later, there was moisture to the bottom of the soil pit on the cover crop side, and where that flaky pale colour is behind Ed, I couldn't even I had to go home and get a pick to get soil test out of that sidewall. It was so hard and dry. The other interesting thing was 5 minutes after the excavator left, 3 mil of rain came through, and all that fallow side on the wall closest to the camera, slate, and the other side of the wall stayed intact just from that rain off 3 mil. And then it just kept on exacerbating itself over time. It's different, but moisture to the bottom of opposed to compaction at 300 mil and hard and dry underneath, where I could use a shovel on the cover crop side to get the soil samples out of that pit, the wall.
So there's clearly a lot better, less density, more porosity in the cover crop trial to a much greater depth. So there's a structural change that's happened over a couple of years with quite low rates of cover crops in the low rainfall season.
You would say when you drove the tractor through, Tom, that there was a difference you would feel?
Yeah. When in moist conditions in winter, the tractor I could drive down that paddock with my eyes shut and I'd hit the fallow and I'd get thrown back in the seat and the tractor would pick up traction on the fallow area. I could pick up half a hectare an hour in its work rate just because I wasn't getting wheel slip over the fallow area. The other thing I'd like to point out is it's not a strict fallow. We've been spraying somewhere else, and that might be one spray over summer. Not every time we get a rain event, we're going and hitting that fallow area. It might only be one knockdown. By the time we get putting a winter crop in, there might be another flush of summer growth or hairy panic or something. It's not a strict fallow. It might be one pass of summer. It's as much fallow treatment as that's like.
Yeah. So, Tom, just before we jump on, Nicola goes forward, how would you deal with those problematic, really poorly structured soils that drain freely at all? Was it ripping? Was it gypsum? Was it just more tillage, like to get it ready for the cereal crops?
Mainly, probably gypsum probably been the go-to. There's a lot now. They're getting some deep amelioration using deep lime incorporation to get the deep acid throttle. So they probably are shattering some of that shallow compaction. Probably there's some heavy rates of lime going out to go with some very heavy rates of urea. So I'd say that the majority, and I've jumped a lot of fences and I've seen canola only rooting to 100 mil. I'd say the biggest thing that's overcoming it is an awful lot of growth promotant in a white krill. And hand-to-mouth water in a relatively safe rainfall environment. But I wouldn't say much is actually changing as far as the structural standpoint. I think it's just a bit of a nutritional balance out to keep the system ticking over, but definitely not a structural change.
Yeah, and I guess there's a cost associated with that high soil amendment program that's very regular too. There's quite a large cost, especially if you're starting to deep incorporate and things from a horsepower and all that sort of thing. Okay, so we're starting to see, that there's different ways we can tackle structural problems, and probably biochemical problems are going to get influenced by it when we get to that. So, Nicola, what's sort of the next step after looking at this initial change that we've seen?
Yeah, so we've got some really good information. I think to thank Michael Ayres and Ed Scott and Vic No-Till that helped us get this information together that we're going to go through, and Carbon Link. So the big issues in Tom's soil is sedicity down low and aluminium toxicity up higher and high magnesium, low calcium. So what I'm going to do is go through each layer. So we've got this is 0 to 10. So on my left, is that your left? 0 to 10 is the cover crop. And on the right, it's where the fallow was treated. So in the 0 to 10 on the cover crop, you can see more root systems and a darker colour than the fallow. The Colwell P, which shows available P and some reserve P over the growing season, is higher, but it's got the same amount of phosphorus, but it's higher than the fallow. The calcium and magnesium is lower in the cover crop, but that is really because the cover crop's cycling those nutrients. And it's going into the plant or being removed or something, but it's just cycling it. So at the top, it is lower. The potassium's higher, so the plants have pulled it up and they've brought that to the top in the cover crop side. The sulfur across the depth, really, because we're going to look from 0 down through to 70 centimetres in the soil test. The sulfur is consistently and significantly higher than the fallow. Again, it's cycling it. But it's still a bit low. Organic matter is 3.9% in the cover crop, which you would imagine is higher. Organic carbon is higher, and again, that's providing a lot more water holding capacity in that top 0 to 10. We're going to start talking about sodium, so the exchangeable sodium percentage. So that's what I'm talking about, those sodic soils. It's lower than the fallow because what's happening is the cover crop, and you'll see all the way through, is pushing the sodium layer lower, where the fallow allows it to kind of evaporate up. The nitrate and ammonium's higher in the cover crop. I've just flicked through. I can't see the bottom, and I've just got to move this. So yeah, you can see on the fallow side, coal wheel P is lower. The calcium and magnesium is higher because those nutrients, they're just sitting there, they're not cycling. I've talked about the sulfur at depth being consistently lower through all the way through each of the horizons, consistently lower in the cover crop side, in the fallow side, and this exchangeable sodium is higher. So the aluminium is a problem in both sides on a soil test. So it's 6%. So you really want your aluminium sort of 5% and lower if you're looking at it sort of chemically. So this is the 10 to 20 centimetre. On the left-hand side is the cover crop, more root systems, darker colour, more moisture. The calcium and magnesium is still being cycled, so it's a bit lower than the fallow. The coal wheel P is still higher because it's cycling it. And this is where you've got this big spike in aluminium, like 25%. And I thought, whoa, is that a mistake? But no, the soil tests 3 years later is still really high. So you do have that high aluminium percentage there, which is on a soil test not attractive. And on the fallow side, you can see that the sulfur is leaching more quickly into the fallow where it's up higher. The fallow side, the sulfur is leaching more quickly, where in the cover crop it's staying up higher. And that's those plants cycling it back up again.
Well, I guess, Nicola, one of the things that really stands out of that 10 to 20 centimetre layer for me is the fact that you've got really high exchangeable aluminium. I mean, the other side to all of that is the low exchangeable calcium that's there. But if we just look at the acid cations, and particularly aluminium, despite that, because that is like for most cereal crops and what we're dealing here with annuals, that's considered highly toxic.
Yeah.
And disruptive. But despite that, you've got really good root development into that layer. So that's despite a really serious dominant acid cation, the aluminium, which, pretty much sugarcane and tea are the only two kind of agricultural crops that like that kind of aluminium. So yeah, that's just amazing how the root volume is still able to really penetrate and fill that area, even though it's got quite a toxic. And we haven't got a large increase in organic matter compared to the fallow side that's buffering that with humus, and that's because that's the other argument, is that the humus would buffer that aluminium and mitigate its influence. But yeah, despite that, so it's obviously the drainage and the oxygen and just the dynamics of air, water and temperature are obviously playing a big part there.
Yeah, and you've certainly got environments where the microbes can survive at depths compared to, the fallow side, because the oxygen's there and the plants are going down there. 20 to 40 centimetres in the cover crop side. Again, unfortunately, you've got a big spike in magnesium all of the way through the profile, but it's on both sides and the aluminium. But again, those plants, they're just pushing through and I mean, magnesium would really tighten the soil, but as you saw, David, there's oxygen in there, and roots growing through there. I had to keep moving my people barrier. How do I get that up there so I can read it? The sodium increases here on the cover crop side. where it's been spread evenly over the fallow. And what that's showing is, yes, it is sodic soils, but the sodium is pushed down by the cover crop and it's allowed to rise where there's no cover crop. But it's still soft and it's still holding moisture and it's non-dispersive. So Michael and Ed did dispersion tests all the way through these profiles. And with an exchangeable sodium percentage of 13%, which you don't want over 6, and magnesium is 41 on the cation exchange, it's still not dispersing. It's holding together and plant roots are just growing through it. On the other side, very hard, which is what Tom said when he was trying to chip it out for the actual soil tests. They're in clods. And again, there's no plants growing down there.
And Nicola, just to jump in, so the sodium level in the cover crop, the exchangeable sodium, so the sodium that's on the clay surface, there's a colloidal sodium cation. It at depth in this soil, in the cover crop, it actually increases, as you mentioned, to that 13-16%, whereas in the fallow it's staying quite low, around 5 and then 8% at 70 centimetres. So there's a lot more exchangeable sodium, which usually, as you pointed out, disrupts soil structure. So the soils disperse, which you normally see, and usually the only 2 times that you see a sodic soil not disperse or collapse is when it's got good organic matter, sort of countering that effect, and obviously calcium's helping too, but good organic matter will counter that. But the other thing that does help is salinity, so which is the natural sort of nutrients in the soil solution. So that is one of the key things about the fallow, is that it's got quite high soil salinity at depth. Both of them have reasonable soil salinity at depth, so that could also be helping kind of mitigate the structure, like stabilizing it.
Yeah.
Just to point out in that the change in the structure on the left hand side on that cover crop, that's not a quad, that's me actually being able to pull up a moisture in that cover crop bag. That's actually me grabbing a soil and making just enough moisture to make it a quad, opposed to the right hand side where it can actually break off quads.
Yeah. So you were saying there's more moisture just then, were you, Tom, on the cover crop side, still down at 70 centimetres? Yeah.
From 40 centimetres down on the cover crop side, up taking the soil and putting it in a Ziploc bag. Every single bag had condensation in it. On the fallow side, from 40 down to 120 to depth, or 70 to depth, but essentially under 40 centimetres, bags had no condensation.
Yeah.
And that was after the being open for 5 days.
It's interesting, isn't it?
It all kind of makes me feel that having much higher oxygen and drainage and temperature and all of those key 3 or 4 elements that we often underestimate, they're really critical, because the organic matter's low at depth in both sides, which is kind of normal, but the root volume's still starting to really change that soil. Rob's got an interesting question there about, could also the microbes be retaining the sodium in the body? I mean, definitely, Rob, the sodium is an essential element for all cells. Whether they're absorbing enough sodium to kind of physically change the proportions, I'm not sure. Definitely the drainage is carrying more sodium off the clay surface down, which is why I think you're getting a concentration in the cover crop at depth. It's much higher, but at the same time, it's still stable. So it's an interesting dynamic, isn't it? So Nicola, that's a really good sort of exploration of how those soils, there's been some change in the chemistry, particularly at depth with sodium. The organic matter is not significantly different between them, the organic carbon, but there's some little bit of changes. And obviously both of these soils have exchangeable aluminium issues, but I guess conversely to that, they've got kind of low exchangeable calcium and relatively high exchangeable magnesium, I guess is you could say as well in the soils. So despite some challenging cation balances, calcium, mag, and aluminium and sodium. We've got a soil that's starting to really stabilize, and I guess, Tom, the key thing is, the numbers on the test can say what they like, but am I getting a soil that's functioning better in the paddock? That's the bottom line. So we can look at ratios here and look at benchmarks and do everything we like, but is the soil functioning better and growing better crops and responding better to fertilizers and all of those things and rainfall? And I think the answer is by talking to you a bit over the last few months, it's definitely starting to see some response.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think the first question people say is, was there more yield? And I'll ask you, Tom, was there more yield?
Between the fallow and the cover crop, no.
And the cash crop, no.
Yeah. The only difference I've seen, was over the last couple of years when we actually went to broadcasting urea, there was a deeper green through the fallow area, which didn't equate to necessarily huge yield change. The biggest thing that I think is that we've been asking the cover crop to cycle so much organic matter that a certain amount of that nitrogen was tied up in residue and cycling, where on the fallow side, it was just available to the plant. There wasn't as much organic matter on the soil. There wasn't as much, so it was just readily available for the plant. But yeah, no, we don't have a yield monitor on the header, but I run around and do head counts and estimates and all that sort of stuff, and it was in there. Holy moly, what did the calculator just say? There might have been some minute ones, but it wasn't like a one spot. It was, the only difference was bad in spring, but not at the harvesting level or anything like that.
So, Tom, you're not adding lime to the fallow area. You're just cropping it now without any other treatments, and then comparing that to a cover crop next door. You're not actively liming for pH and aluminium. So
the difference in that area is the knockdown over summer. Same nutrient package. Last time we had lime and gypsum go out on that was 2017. So you're not treating it any different other than one plants don't grow if we have enough moisture over summer, which the last two we actually haven't, or if there's a small amount of hogweed that grew last summer. This one just gone. We didn't even plant an acre in summer cover crop this year because it was so dry. The only difference between a summer knockdown.
Yeah, great. So Andy's question in there is about managing the aluminium. So Andy, at the moment, the paddocks aren't getting a lime and or gypsum to help deal with acidity, and particularly the aluminium acidity at the moment, and they haven't since 2016, or 17. So Katem. The cover crops have been going out, I think, if I got it right, Tom, since 2016. Most years.
17. And the only reason last 2 years didn't get planted was we actually just didn't have enough summer moisture. At the summer prior, usual summers for it, had really wet winters and then wet summers, which isn't typical for us. The last 2 summers have been probably on the dry side, but it just didn't warrant us planting. You're going to risk it. If anyone just heard anything, it wasn't a gun for we've got a thunderstorm going over the top of this spot to it.
Yeah, great. Thanks.
Should go plant a couple of times. So the only difference in the last 2 years is the sun enough moisture. Yeah.
So, Nicola, I'm just mindful of time and want to give Luke and Robin a bit of a go. So, what's your, if you can pull things together in the next few minutes, that'd be good.
Yeah. I'm not going to show this video, but it's just when they did the deep core testing, it was showing how hard it was on I'm going to keep going through the cover crop to.
No, I saw the wheels fell off the vehicle when it was in the fallow area. Yep. Okay, keep going.
All right. I've got to get this picture of everyone away so I can read. Okay.
Yeah. So you said you weren't going to sell him anything, but now you got a recommendation.
I'm saying this is not a recommendation for Tom. Tom's doing a really good job on his own, but I was asked to do what I would say. So just to give people an idea of why you might make a decision. So continue cover crop in December in opportune seasons. So I think your last couple of years it's been really dry, so you might not have put a cover crop in, Tom. Don't go overboard with the cost, which you've already worked out. When you're using glyphosate, acidify the water with citric acid so you don't dilute the glyphosate naturally with the water. And add 1 to 2 litres of NutriSoil, because that contains both citric acid, fulvic acid, and a natural surfactant, but it's also giving that plant, giving the microbes in the soil amino acids. So it's feeding those indigenous microbes. So you're basically getting it at the right acidity to work, and you're using fulvic out of the NutriSoil and the natural surfactant for it to get into the plant, and also amino acids feeding the microbes while it's happening, so buffering it. For the low sulfur and calcium, 500 kilos of lime, 500 kilos of gypsum, and 250 kilos of worm castings per hectare. Now, this is probably low on your list of what you want to do. Like, everyone's just like lime, gypsum. But if I think that the cover crop is addressing these things, but if you wanted it to work more quickly, you could start doing a little bit in a biological way, at the surface, and also keep working through those.
Well,
but it'll be a dollar question.
If we're trying to enhance this system, like we're trying to take it to the next level, so, we've been asking Tom, we know aluminium is really disruptive, and we know opposite to that, there's low calcium in this soil in the cations because of the dominance of the acidity and sodium there. So, the question is, with liming and or gypsum now, with the soil starting to function much better from a structure point of view, is that actually going to take the soil to the next level? That's the question, because a soil amendment like lime or gypsum or compost or whatever, is supposed to improve the functioning of the soil, overcome soil constraints so that it grows crops better. So, in theory, it should enable the sort of really jump to the next level, if that makes sense. So, and that's the question I guess Tom's got to answer is, what can I try and jump this soil to another level? What investment do I need to do that? Or at the moment, do I just let it tick along because it's not going too badly? It's an economic decision, but, the theory is we're trying to jump these soils to a new, much more higher functioning level. How do we get there? How long do we need to take to get there? How much investment do we need?
Yeah.
Sorry, Nicola. So yeah, coating with NutriSoil.
That's great. And I didn't think that because it's in a better condition it might work easily. I was thinking more because it's in a biological form when you're working, with cover crop as well. But I like that thought process as well. At sowing, coat the seed with 5 litres per hectare of NutriSoil. That's just giving that seed that microbial connection straight away. So it puts its efforts into putting root systems down, and it's protected with the right microbes, and it starts building your mycorrhizal fungi, which will scavenge for the phosphorus. In furrow, 5 litres per hectare, and I say this tentatively, but a 5 litre liquid calcium to help with that, the acidity. Hybrid Ag have a liquid calcium, but I would jar test it because I think they can. I think I've spoken to Ron today who uses it, and he's on the webinar tonight, and he's used it with Humate before. So I'm pretty sure NutriSoil and liquid lime would work together. Jar test it first and always use it straight away and wash it out straight away, because if you leave it overnight, you'll have problems in your tank. So, because liquid calcium can be tricky to use. 50 to 80 kilograms of MAP, depending on nitrogen in the profile from the cover crop. And look, the reason, regenerative agronomy is about what's going on in that particular situation. I know your situation. It's cold, it's wet. Trying to do work without nitrogen in your system the plants just can't keep up. So that's context specific to everyone. But I think that, and you're using it too. That's what you probably need. Any in-crop herbicide, 2 litres of NutriSoil, 1 to 2 litres to buffer the herbicide. So what you're doing is you're feeding amino acids to the non-selected plants so that they can use those amino acids and keep growing and not have to stop growing and clean up the chemical. And also it's going to be feeding your indigenous microbes. Do foliar application on the SAP test results. So do a SAP test late tillering, which I know is what you do. and apply that at stem elongation, because at this point your nitrogen will have run out of the MAP, and it's when you see your crops really demanding the most N. And then what you can do to do a SAT test, I'm not going to try and address it myself. You could take it to someone like Hybrid Ag and ask for them to do a mix for you to address the deficiencies, or you can have a general foliar mix on hand, like Ectol Micromax, or you could have things in the shed that you know that you consistently use and make up your own brews. There's some really good SAT test groups, which I'm sure you'd be aware of, that help you with that type of thing. There's a Agrarian's biofertilizer manual you can have a look at. I think you can purchase that online. Soil and food biofertilizer courses, and
you can get our manual for free. So
and there's a manual. Okay, you don't have to pay $20 for David's manual.
No.
So yeah, if you've got the headspace, and sometimes, Tom, you don't have the headspace to do this stuff yourself, but you could try and start working like that yourself. Dissolve urea. So your nitrogen in your foliar, use it at 20 kilos of dissolved urea. You can have that done beforehand, so you're not having to dissolve it and then go out. It's another job. I know it gets very busy, so you can keep that in a sealed container ready to go. Add your missing nutrients from the SAT test and 5 liters of NutriSoil. So what you're doing is you're adding those nutrients in a biological form. So those nutrients go into the microbe and they can go into the leaf of the plant, but you're also adding fulvic acids and citric acids and all sorts of hormones and things that these microbes are making, and essentially the amino acids, because that's in NutriSoil, and a plant uses amino acids which without having to work hard. So putting that biological in with your nutrient application is it takes you to another level. And then if conditions are okay and you haven't got a flood or you haven't got a drought, do another SAT test 14 to 21 days after, and just repeat again.
Yeah, I think
you gave us a differential SAT test. I don't think we have time to go through that tonight. But yeah, that's a whole new game. And why is this regenerative agronomy to me? So the lime and gypsum applications are being kept low if they're added with worm casting, so it's more a biological approach. Your cover crops are increasing the supply of sulfur and phosphorus and pushing down the acidicity. You're using less nitrogen by having nitrogen in the system already, and you're also dissolving nitrogen, so you're using that as foliar urea, using less nitrogen, better for your soil, better for your budget. Microbes are more abundant and diverse from the use of doing less harm. And buffering your herbicides and NutriSoil and cover crop. Plants are still growing through harsh chemical environments due to the organic matter, the high microbial biomass and diversity, but I think key is what David said, that aerated soil. You got your sheep mob graze in the cover crop, so that's increasing soil health, fattening them and making you money. Less need for fungicides and pesticides because plants are nutritionally better balanced, but sometimes you need to use it. And what's that say down there? So you're growing healthy crops, but you're also building soil health and water holding capacity. That's me.
Thanks, Nicola. You covered a lot of ground. There's a couple of questions came in. I'm going to go to Luke in a minute, and he'll give a kind of a parallel sort of suggestions, and we might circle back on a few of those things. But just a quick one, Andy's saying about if you're not using urea, what would you suggest as an alternative for this crop? Well, I think there was MAP or DAP as a starter in the program, Andy. So that's a bit of N, obviously under the crop to get it going. And I think Nicola has put in there urea, but there is some other kind of alternative N products that are chemical fertilizers, but they stabilize the end. And I think she mentioned one of the companies, Ectol, and amino acids is the other one, and Ectol, so the kind of stabilized fertilizer N and or amino acid forms.
Yeah, they have a product called Nitratane, which is a good one.
Yeah, it's fairly high analysis N. But amino acids, Andy, yeah. So they're kind of an organic, if you like, or a carbon-based form of nitrogen compounds, and they've been shown to be a fairly clear biostimulant for plants. So they're part of the program. Thank you, Nicola, very much. So I think there's about 18 litres of NutriSoil altogether a hectare there, though. Like there was a bit of NutriSoil in there.
Yes.
Thanks very much for that.
I think
And
go straight to Luke, David, because of time.
I'm going to. Yep. So if you'd like to stop sharing your screen, that'd be good because that way we can bring up the picky again. So Luke, welcome. I know there was a mention of hybrid ag, which is a kind of alternative agronomy option for people, but you work for Regen Farming, or you own Regen Farming. You also work for it. So you're obviously another option for people that are in Victoria and central New South Wales. You offer kind of biological soil and agronomy services. Welcome.
Thank you, David. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Tom, for stepping up to the plate and being under the microscope. I have to admit, that soil test pit that when it was advertised, that was one of the ones that I wanted to get to. Most of these days I'll go, I'll be right, but that one was one that I really wanted to get to, but I just couldn't get there. I'll be honest with you, I haven't put a lot of time into this. We've had a pretty hectic last 3 weeks with a few things happening. So I've just really concentrated on the cover crop side of things. And that's really where I'm looking, because I want to try and get you some more yield. So just one question. Have you done a biological test?
As in a Solvita respiration test?
A DNA, send it off to Metagems or whatever.
All we've done through David's one, we did a Solvita test on one of the hashes, and it was basically non-detectable on the fallow and flew off the top of the chart out the crop side. But haven't done a DNA, just the Solvita respiration test.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I'd just love to see what that would be if you did one, because I just look at the soil test and the SAP test, and for me, you've got plenty of available phosphorus in your soil test, but in the SAP test, you're not that flash. You're sort of in the low range. So that suggests that's just a suggestion to me that it'd be worthwhile looking at your getting a fungal test done, just to see whether you've got that mycorrhizal in there and so trichoderma and all those sorts of things, which are making that available to the plant and making it easier for the plant to accept, because it's there, but it doesn't seem to be in the plant. So that would be just
between the 3 different products that go on the seed, plus what goes in the tank. All of them have got trichoderma or mycorrhizal or whatever. So I think, because it is certainly going on the seed at heavy rate between multiple products and going in the long strain.
Yeah. No, that's fine. I'd just be interested to see what's in the soil and see why that is not going into the plant. The other thing I just sort of noticed was in your plant, in your SAP test, your calcium's low, nitrates are low, and there's a few other things. So just a bit of instead of putting, and you probably know all this anyway, but maybe using a calcium, like that calcium trisulfate, David, which is a calcium sulfur product.
Calcium thiosulfate.
Thiosulfate, yep. And that, about the only thing I'd mix with that is a bit of nitrogen. Otherwise, you'll hate me forever if you put anything else with it, I would think. So that would cover the calcium and nitrogen and sulfur issue. And then, I just look at some of those trace elements a bit as well. Like I'd like to see the moly a bit higher, your boron higher, those sorts of things. And you know all this, but I think we just to cover it. But that's just a really simple look at the quick look I've had at it. So
Luke, you tackle them with foliar sprays in crop, a lot of those micronutrients.
Yep. Yeah, especially if you're not going to do the micronutrients for sure, but if you're not going to do like a lime and gypsum application, I think you can just direct inject it into the plant, give it the benefit of it at a lower cost, and still hopefully get a yield bump and a healthy plant. So
most of the SAP tests that are coming back, so obviously that was a pre-application. Nearly everything is coming back and calcium, boron, moly, in the tillering, the pre-boot phase. The ultimate condition where you're faced is we're dry, we're trafficable, we get 50 mil of rain and catch you in 6-7 weeks paddock. We can't can't get on, which has been the ultimate catch-22 that we've had with the foliars. But yes, a lot of the brews have come back in last year with the significant calcium, log urea, which is pre-made for us. The time constraint with molly boron, calcium in the mix.
Yeah. So yeah, that's just really quickly, and your calcium is on the low side. So yeah, how do you tackle that? That's just a decision that you guys have to make as a farming decision. But yeah, if you can get it into the plant, that'd be the go. But anyway, that's sort of really my simple look at it from what I've done, had a look. So yeah, with that question, yeah, definitely amino acids for nitrogen as an alternative to a nitrogen situation. Yeah, and you've got your time constraints, so I won't do a KNF recipe for you because then you've got to go make it. And that might be another thing that you could look at is doing a heavily fungal IMO compost, which is something I'll have to send you. But it's pretty easy to make, but just a little bit time consuming. But it's something that you could do in your spare time.
And then just in a tea bag, extract it off with pressured air.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
That'd be interesting to see that DNA, because in theory we're doing everything right, but if there's actually a low number, that'd be fascinating to see. If we actually are quite low in microbes, even though here we're doing everything right, plus applying it on seed, going in, that'd be a very rich shock actually.
Yeah, because a lot of us put these things on, but if you don't measure, you don't know. And unfortunately, there are a lot of products out there that probably aren't as good as what we would like them to be. So,
where and how for the DNA test?
There's a few around. We just the cheapest one is Metagen, but there's some people in Albury now that are doing a more expensive, more probably covering a bit more country. David's got a few guys, knows a few people as well. But so Grant Kelson in, I think, what's the name of Grant's place, Leanne? Great Southern Biology. They do they send it off to the States and they'll tell you everything you ever wanted to know. But the Metagen one's probably the most cost effective or cheapest one, I would say, that I've come across anyway. But I can send you some info on those.
And you can actually ask them just to give you a report on the fungal population, the community of different fungi, rather than the whole kit and caboodle. And some of them you could even just say, look, I just want to know what my mycorrhizal count is. Is it high, medium, or low? So you can kind of target in because otherwise you get, as you know, Luke, you get heaps and heaps of info on these tests.
Oh, yeah.
So we can kind of get them to give you a targeted report. So yeah, there's options there. So I guess, Luke, your, Nikala, and then your kind of observations after Nikala's sort of recommendations or observations is kind of throwing open a whole lot of things. And we've got a lot of people on here tonight, some of whom are a bit new into it. Other people are quite experienced. But just to sort of pull it all together, like you can hear just from the two guys and Tom and everyone talking with Nikala and Luke, there's kind of like these other tools in the toolbox for doing agronomy now on top of the normal fertilizers and the normal killing things, biocides, herbicides and insecticides, which still might be in the mix, but I guess we're trying to use them at lower rates or much lower rates, depending on what we're doing. And now we have these biostimulants and inoculants and other types of products that are trying to build up physiology of plants and stimulate soil function rather than just knocking out the bad guys. We're also trying to build up the good guys. It's called positive reinforcement, I think, when you're teaching kids or teaching people, like give them positive encouragement. And so some of these things like biostimulants, like seaweed or NutriSoil or stuff, like they've got not many nutrients in them. Sometimes they have micronutrients in them. So the other day someone asked me, well, if it doesn't have nutrients in it and it doesn't have bugs in it, what is it? And I said, well, it's like Red Bull. So if you think about lots of people drink too much Red Bull or energy drinks. It doesn't have any carbohydrates in it if it's a low sugar one. It doesn't have nutrients in it. So what the hell does it do, though? It certainly has an effect on your body. And that's the same with biostimulants and coffee and things like that. They don't give you any nutrition, but they have an effect on your body. And that's the same with biostimulants. They don't necessarily give you nutrients or bugs, but they still have an effect on plant physiology when they're used properly.
Yeah, Dave, with
I'm
the
so happy both jumped on that. You go.
just with the with the biostimulants and things like that, and it doesn't matter. I think it's a bit of a mindset change when we go down the regenerative path as well. Is we always wanting to promote life instead of just trying to prevent death, which is what we seem to have done in the past. And I think too, Tom, that that you've probably got reasonable biological system there, whether you've got all the right ones, because otherwise your plants wouldn't be pushing down deep through that aluminium and through the sodicity, and that without that protection. Like when everybody pulls up those plants, got the nice dreadlocks on it, like I call that the armor. Like that's the castle wall, and that protects that plant so much. So I think if you can get that going, that's just a huge help and gets you through those tougher layers. So there's definitely good stuff happening there, but it's just, we're just really interested in why there's not enough phosphorus in your plant.
Thanks, Luke. Look, I'm mindful of time, and I'm going to open it up to a few questions from everyone out there, or comments or experiences. If those of you got plenty of experience out there, I can see some names. So we might do that. So is there any questions from the floor or comments or observations that people would like to throw in? Then please just put it into chat, and then I might get you to turn your mic on. So, So David and Ruth Reed, David, g'day guys. You've got we have sprayed calcium nitrate and boron as a foliar. It has no friends. We now use it on its own batch. So you're talking about the cal nitrate, David, or the boron separately?
No, the cal nitrate with boron from Campbell's. We tried to use, we tried to mix it in part of our combined brew, and it was
right.
It got very got very angry with everything else, so we just self and do a second load.
Yeah, cool. But it is a good way. I mean, like in terms of having a bit of key boron in with calcium, it is one way with the foliars just to get that off the shelf product. And that calcium nitrate plus boron is a pretty common horticulture product. And that's the thing that I kind of, having worked in horticulture for a few years as an agronomist and managed a branch for a national company, horticulture company, there's lots of really interesting horticultural fertilizers that are soluble and you can use as foliar sprays that they often use in fertigation that can be pretty handy to bring into your mix if it's something you need as well. Any other questions?
Horticulture is a good 15 or 20 years ahead of broadacre.
They certainly, like humates, and when I used to work in that space fairly, when I was working it all the time, Tom, and that's going back 10 to 15 years, like seaweed and humic acid were pretty much mainstream, even with your big conventional guys. They'd chuck that in the fertigation with things. So they definitely have probably a few years ahead of us in terms of cropping with the biostimulant side of it. Yeah. Any other thoughts or questions? Observations anyone wants to throw in to the guys? We did have a presentation from Robin, but we'll probably pull it up, I reckon, Nicola, after the comments. But Robin was going to put in a bit of a cover cropping mix, and I guess that's a whole other topic as to the right mix to suit those heavier riverine soils for summer and for winter. It's a challenge when you don't get much rain.
Yeah, Dave, I just another thing I'd like to say. I think Tom hit the nail on the head at the right at the start when he was talking about we might have to we get a bit of ideology in our lives sometimes, and sometimes we have to put that aside just so we can get through. And when we know we've done something that's detrimental, then we have to think about what can we go back and do to fix it. But you got to put that aside. And and with the summer covers and things like that in our area in the Riverina, they're a very opportunistic thing. But I would love to see in every cropping scenario, every 4 years or so, a winter multi-species go into the rotation just to heal that soil and make things happen. And I don't know, silage it, do whatever, sell it to the dairy farm down the road. If you don't have livestock, whatever you do with it, do with it. But I think that's another strategy that we could use.
Yeah, great point. And having worked in sugarcane where they've got the grass monoculture for 5 or 6 years and they had serious soil-borne diseases and all kinds of stuff going on, their own research really clearly showed when you had a break crop, and in their case, the research was only legumes, one species, but as you know, Simon Matson and some of those other regen cane farmers, they started to go multi-species break crops, and it definitely really seemed to drive those soils in. Yeah, it was pretty phenomenal. It was some of the light bulb moments for me around multi-species with some of those cane guys and how they'd really turned their soils around. And so we know diversity is the enemy of soil-borne diseases. So that's a really good idea to bring in, especially if you're not willing to do a pasture phase, like if you're not willing to go back into a multi-year pasture phase, the traditional mixed farming tactic. If you just want to stay cropping, then having that, because as you pointed out, you can still make a bit of money out of it.
Yeah.
Great. Thanks, Luke.
I'm happy to answer any questions. But to sort of have a lot of people ask, where do I start? Which is it is how long's a piece of string. Debt level, do you own your farm? You're trying to grow. There are so many different facets. Are you north of Dubbo? Are you south of Rutherglen? Are you west of Adelaide? Like, there's so many different scenarios as to what your system is capable of. And moisture and growth will let you break a lot of rules. I wouldn't say perfectly. If I had my time again, the absolute no-brainers is drop the gunk off the seed and put biology on. Like, fungicide disease has just been a non-issue. There's been one fungicide spray we did because we just needed to get a crop in, and I was not willing to take that financial risk, but we chucked all sorts of carbon, amino acids in with the fungicide just to make myself feel good. That's been a piece of cake, dropping the seed off. Insects, measure it. But if I had my time over again, wherever your fertilizer program is, and I remember I think it might have been out at the Denny Day a couple of years back, and he's starting to do some cool stuff as a young fella saying, I want to stop using nitrogen or urea. I said, how much are you using? And he said 400 kilos. And I said, don't touch it. Whatever you do not touch it, because that is paying all your bills at the moment. Maybe you can reduce it by 30%, but just start adding carbon. Just buffer stuff, because if you pull that nutritional lever, especially in a cold environment, it will go kaput bloody quick. And now there's, they hate me doing it, but Dave and Lara up in Queensland, yes, they got a warm environment. But when David first said to me, this is interesting, I said, whatever you do not touch your fertilizer program. And they've learnt now that they can tweak it without touching it, only adding carbon in soils where there was no worms. They got worms back in 3 years, like just as a general soil change, soil health. James out at Brocklesby, I'm not sure where his urea rate got to now, but I know for the first I caught up ran into him a year later, didn't touch it, but added the carbon source. Now his soils are starting to accelerate. So if I had my time over again and we were only using 100, 120 kilos of urea, 100 kilos of MAP, I would have left that lever right where it was and just added the carbon source and back off chuck the insecticide in as you're going to do a broadleaf just in case. Just in case, put a fungicide out, start looking for those thresholds, and you'll be quite surprised how quickly you can step away. But if you are reliant on that nutritional program, don't touch it, because it will be paying a lot of your bills, maybe 30%, or try small. So don't go do the whole farm. Yeah. But my one advice is be very careful on that nutritional lever. There's lots of other levers you can pull relatively quick, but that nutritional one is dangerous.
Yeah, thanks, Tom, very much. And it's really pertinent, as you know, but in cropping when you've got really low organic matter and organic carbon, because particularly for nitrogen, when nitrogen's in the soil, 95% of it's in organic matter. So it's cycled, that's where its kind of reserve is. And so if I don't have organic matter, I don't have a reserve of nitrogen, which is why when you pull nitrogen from a cropping program, when it doesn't have organic matter with supplying nitrogen to the soil, it goes south really quickly on you. So I guess in a way, you're keeping the nitrogen going, which is a macronutrient. We know we need it for vegetative growth along with carbon from the photosynthesis. But all in a way, what you're doing with that tactic is it's a low risk because you're keeping the nitrogen because you can't get it out of organic matter. It's not going to flip overnight. But you're also adding all the other micro and macronutrients to the plant, either as a foliar or as a more well-rounded fertilizer program at starter. So there's more balanced vegetative growth. So the plant's metabolically more balanced. So it'll actually use that nitrogen more effectively, and you won't get the side effects of kind of sappy plants that are insect attracting because it's more balanced. So that's the whole idea of nutritional balance of the plant. But I'm keeping my N up because I know that's going to drive yield, and I cannot get N from my soil because it ain't got any organic matter. So, this is the way we're trying to shift things and create a new equilibrium.
Yeah. And if you've got animals in the system, it allows you to break a lot of those rules, but it's still a very, very delicate lever to pull, and if you pull it wrong way, too hard, or anything, it hits hard.
Yeah. So as Luke's pointed out, it's about building a positive framework. So if we're adding micronutrients to it, if we dial back the N, 10, 15%, we've got a few dollars per hectare to play with. Let's put that into micronutrients and seed coatings, optimize the germination zone and optimize the balance, the plant's nutritional balance, to use that in a more balanced way. And then we're definitely going to get a sort of better outcome as we transition over.
The bit that just makes me want to bang my head against the wall is we got some recent soil tests done, and I didn't intentionally set a bloke up, but I wanted to get a test out of that trial paddock, and another one that actually grew our best crop last year. And on a cal-mag ratio on aluminium, sodium, magnesium, everything was more elevated in our best crop, but it came out of 6 years of pasture and it had more soil end. So then we talk about and we did everything to buffer it, but then you just keep getting these things about some of the macro stuff, some of the biological buffering capacity around your root system to flush that out, but that nitrogen component all of a sudden is put in the face of a cal-mag ratio, aluminium, sodium, and magnesium to say, here again, where and what's that perfect balance? Because there's always something that just challenges everything that on paper should not be doable.
Tom, the soil tests we use are 1950s technology, my friend. Let's be really clear. Most of these chemical techniques are from the mid-20th century, and that's not me being exaggerating. Those chemical methods, they're approximations of a complex system, and we now know how bloody complex it is biochemically as well as biologically. So. And we know that it's a two-way street. As roots start to exudate all their compounds, that changes the actual, dynamic equilibrium of biochemistry in real time because they give off different compounds, things like that, different species.
The worst thing we did to that paddock was last year with the dry start, we also contained 600 ewes and lambs in there for 3 months and dumped hay across the paddock and put into the wettest areas. And then by spring, there wasn't much growth. We needed somewhere to put the ewes, so we put them back in there again. So they dumped all sorts of manure, urinated all over it, plus club clover. But as far as what a soil test is, would be horrendous or should have been our worst form, it was actually best by other means, biological function, stimulation, whatever it was.
You just gave the answer to your question. That's sheep. When I used to do rock phosphate trials in the 2000s around Peak Hill, Narromine, Nyngan, we didn't have many of those soil biology tools at all. So I used to just ask the guys, do you run sheep in these paddocks? And that's would estimate how much MAP we could lower, because the more sheep they'd run through the system, the more I was confident they had a bit of biology going on. That was about as sophisticated as it got. So it's a complex thing, isn't it? So we just got to keep going and use the lie detector, which is obviously the harvester. Andrew's got a question there. We've only got a few minutes left, so we've got a questions come in while we're chatting there. What is carbon? What products do you add to cover fertilizer with carbon? So Andrew, carbon is of course an essential element for life. It comes in from photosynthesis, and plants fix carbon dioxide and turn it into carbon type material like plant material, cellulose. And so anything that was alive or is alive is made from carbon. It's the building block of life, if you like. So when we're talking carbon agronomy, we're usually talking something like humic acid, which is a form of brown coal, pretty much, that's been processed. So it's full of carbon. Or people use molasses as a form of carbon. What other kinds of carbon, apart from green manure crops, which have got plenty of carbon in them? Sugar. What am I missing, Luke?
Root exudates, mate.
Root exudates. But in terms of products to add, pretty
products.
much fulvic acid,
Fulvic,
humic
yeah.
acid, and molasses are the three that people like to chuck in tanks or put around seeds, Andrew.
You make an FPJ.
Could make it. Don't start doing Korean natural farming jargon at 8:57, Luke. It is 8:57 p.m. What are you doing, man? Korean natural farming is not. Don't bring the jargon in. Fish. Thank you, Rob. Fish is another one.
Instatank have a product called Trigger, which is just carbon granular. You can mix with it if you want to be, super easy.
So it's a human product. It's humic. Why you keep dropping their name? Yes. So it's a humic acid type product. Thanks to Carla. Even NutriSoil's got carbon in it, but you've already got about 18 litres of NutriSoil going out a hectare. So you better give some other companies some business, Tom. All right.
To keep it simple, we just fulvic in the tank, humic if it's going out or down the bin. We're probably going to actually treat vert this year, but in the past, just for ease, it's not perfect. And I'm not putting a coated granule of urea with a carbon source every single one. But I'm happy enough if there's urea here and there's one bit of humic in there. For me, it's easy. I'm doing something more nothing. So just keep it simple, whatever works.
Yeah. Omnia's got a carbon one for your 30 coat for your fertilizer. So any of those.
And it's a good coating. We tested it when we used to do the R&D on black urea versus the different coatings, and it was good. Kelp's got some carbon in it too. Thank you, Rob. Ferticoat is a commercial humic acid based for prills like urea prills. And he's got a quick question. What are you treating your seed with, Tom?
Yeah, well, the plug in 5 litres of NutriSoil. We have been using a Lorico's BAM at 5 litres, and then you have been using Hybrid Ag Fish Kelp fulvic emulsion at 3 litres, so combining to 13 litres per tonne. We changed over because it just has a lot of the FKF or hybrid fulvic kelp fish emulsion in a different, but it's biologically enhanced. I think it's called pre-seed this year. Just chucking more strains of biology on it. But every time we've added more, either in literage or more product, the more stuff that seems to go on when the seed shoots out of root. Just harvesting stuff or blue hyphae all over it. Can't go wrong.
Tom, it's called the BNS effect, mate. The more grog you bring to the BMS and the more different people come, the more messy the party gets, my friend. So
I've heard about it. Take your word for it. I haven't actually finished one.
Ecology 101. All right, Andy, that gives you a bit of an answer. So it's 9 o'clock. We better pull it up, Shelley and Nicola. Hopefully that went all right, everyone. There's lots of people here. Andrew, you've got a question about ratio of water to urea when dissolving it per 10,000 litres. We might. Luke, do you want to tackle that straight away? Well, we can send
after
Andrew the answer
to do maths.
Yeah, we can, Andrew. We can get that answer for you. Yeah, we'll get that answer to you. So thank you everyone for coming in. Hopefully you've got a bit of food for thought from it, and thanks to Tom and Luke and Nicola for giving their thanks, Rob, for that, and everyone else who threw something in. Questions. Thank you everyone for coming in. We hope to see you at the next Agronomy Regen webinar online. I'll hand back to Shelley.
Yeah, thanks everybody, and thanks to the team, Nicola, Luke, Tom, and David for just speaking so obviously openly and sharing. And thanks to everyone for their feedback. It was great to see everything coming through on the chat. We'll send this through to everyone if you need to rewatch it. But also, Robin Tate also recorded a recommendation about the cover crops and what to use. So we'll attach that somehow into the link that we send out tomorrow, so you'll be able to watch that. And yeah, big thank you. Sleep well. I hope your brains aren't going to explode after that. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Shelley. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for coming on today, Robin, and sharing your thoughts and suggestions on getting some diversity into Tom's rotation. Do you want to start giving us your ideas now?
Yes. Firstly, I'll just apologise that I'm not there in person. Joel Williams is in Tassie, and my mind has been filled with lots of new ideas and knowledge and helping me join some dots. And very timely a workshop on looking at SAP differentials, because I must admit, when I looked at our SAP differentials, it was very daunting. So it's nice to gather some more information so I can help further into the future with my clients. So first of all, as I talked about in our last workshop, I really like to sit down and ask lots of questions with the farmer, understand what they're looking to achieve, what's happening on the farm, listen to the words that they're using, and what might be holding them back in trialing different things on their farm. So like to walk the farm, observe what's happening above and below ground, and then spend some time. In this case, there's been a fair bit of data that's been collected. So have a look at that data and then really work together and come up with a plan with what will be feasible for the season and what is suitable for the Tom and his dad to bring into the rotation. Also, it will be important to look at our weather forecast, what's actually coming up, and thinking about what the next crop is in the rotation. So now let's look at the addressing the soil test and SAP testing that has been done in this paddock. Now, what initially I'd like to say, it was really interesting. Normally, we take soil tests around that 10 to 15, 10 to 20 centimetre mark, and we make all our recommendations from that level of soil. But being fortunate enough in this paddock to have soil tests done to a metre, and what I would have recommended on that top 20 centimetres was really not suitable for what was down below that 20 centimetres. And I think that's a big, just a big wake-up call that there's a lot more going on in the soil, and sometimes we hedge all our bets on that particular soil test, but there's a lot more that we need to actually look at and observe out in the landscape. So the magnesium is actually very low in that 0 to 20 centimetre mark. And the pH is actually a little bit lower. So traditionally, I would probably say, let's go and put some dolomite on there, which is calcium and magnesium. But then we go down below 20 centimetres and it's really, really high. So there is no more requirement for magnesium. And so then I thought maybe there's a way that we could address that magnesium shortage in that top layer with using plants, which I'll talk about later. Very interesting to see that aluminium is very high at that 10 to 20 centimetre rate, even to the point of causing some toxicity. Corresponds to a lower pH at 5.4. So it's going to be important to lift our calcium levels in here. So although the pH is sort of okay, I think it'll be important. Well, and we really need magnesium there to keep our calcium to magnesium ratio in a good order. I'm actually going to say, let's put some calcium on there because calcium was actually low in the SAP when we actually look at the SAP testing. What I also picked up, which is really interesting, that in that fallow crop that is beside this crop, the aluminium was sitting at the 0 to 10 centimetres, and that cover crop, the use of cover crops in the history has actually pushed that aluminium layer down deeper, which means we can start pushing our roots down deeper and have a bigger pot that we grow our plants. Looking in also in the SAP testing, it was interesting to note that there's low sugar levels in the plant, which would suggest that our photosynthesis efficiency is a bit low. And magnesium is one of those important minerals in photosynthesis. And that's actually low in the plants as well. And another thing I picked up was that the ammonium was actually still sitting quite high, suggesting it's not being fully converted to proteins. So thanks to Joel, and what he's pointed out that sugars and magnesium are really critical for that ammonium conversion. So yeah, we need to look at ways of getting those plants photosynthesizing. Now, because in a cover crop, it might actually be quite dry, plants might be quite stressed, I would actually be starting to address some of these deficiencies in the plant during the actual cash crop. And let's see what we can do through using a cover crop in the meantime. So my suggestion for the cover crop is, obviously we're planting in December. It's going to be really dry. Hopefully there's some rain or summer storms on the forecast so that we can actually get those plants up and running. So I've picked plants that can deal with the aluminium, are also great at unlocking magnesium. So we've got and also summer species, so they're putting a lot of sugar into the ground, building our organic matter, feeding our biology. So sorghum, millet, buckwheat, sunflowers, lab, soybeans, cowpea and rape. Now I've put in a higher component of legume in there as well so that we can build up our nitrogen to help feed our wheat crop. Yeah, and it was very interesting. There's a number of perennial plants that deal with dry conditions that could have been used in here, but as it's a cropping rotation, you don't want to spend the money on perennial seed. And then just as something a little bit different to think about, maybe there could be a way that we could use a companion plant with our wheat, one to deal with the magnesium issue, also to deal with the aluminium, and just provide some diversity in that wheat crop. So buckwheat, magnesium and phosphorus, bird's foot trefoil, which is a legume to provide some nitrogen, deals well with aluminium, and then plantain being a perennial. Now, I'm not saying that these have to go all the way through to harvest. It would be something that we can plant initially and then spray out down the track in the wheat crop. So yeah, that was what I suggested going forward at Tom's place.
Thanks, Robin. Interesting you've got plantain there as a wheat companion, and that being a perennial and expensive. How were you thinking of using that as a companion?
Well, I'm just thinking a really, really small amounts. So generally in mixes, I'm only putting 100 grams, 200 grams of plantain. So you just think about it as a smattering through the paddock just to help that wheat. And it's going to be bringing up nutrition as well, a different plant and different exudates feeding different biology. And can I just go back? I forgot to suggest when we're putting our cover crop in, it's really important that we really start to build the biology there. So that's when I would definitely putting NutriSoil on the seed. Now you could put fertilizer here and very small amounts of DAP potentially, but the crop will be more than fine without some fertilizer. And if by chance there is rain and the plants are actively growing, it might be an opportunity to actually do a foliar feed through here, bring in your biology again, maybe bring some foliar urea or some micronutrients, some of those ones that were a little bit low in the sap test from previous crop. Obviously, sap test is what's happening there and then in that plant, so we can't hang our hat on those results. We would need to potentially look again what's happening in this current conditions in that plant. So,
in an ideal situation, Robin, would you do sap tests on any of these plants?
Yeah, because I suppose, yes, in an ideal world, if your plant was growing well and there was lots of opportunity to put on foliar. Because it is our cover crop really is we want that growing to full capacity, photosynthesizing well, because we're trying to unlock nutrition, bring in organic matter, the sugar exudates, which will then set up our future crop. So so a lot of work can be done in our cover crop to set up our cash crop.
Would you suggest to take like the grasses and the legumes and the brassicas as 3 separate sap tests? Because I imagine they'll come back with different readings. Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd pick the plant that you really want to drive in that cover crop. So take that sap test, because if you mix everything together, every plant is very different to what it can unlock.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Robin. I think that would bring a lot of diversity into the rotation, and what an interesting thought to put in plantain as a small smattering. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Well, look, if anyone has any questions about that, they can just put it in the chat and I can get in contact with you later. But yeah, thank you very much.